Okay, and lastly, we come to simplicity, which is just a guideline, kind of like the rule of thirds. It's a guideline that tells us that our brains like simple photos. Not always, of course, but they like simple photos just because it's easier to take in. Our eyes can easily rest on that image and understand what it is. Our brain doesn't like having to figure out what's going on when it looks at stuff. So you might have heard this called like minimalism before in art. So when we say simplicity, it's kind of like photography minimalism. But as we're going to see in some of these examples, it doesn't have to be the hardcore, straight, minimalistic setting. So here's an example of a very simple photo. There's not a lot going on here. You have a lot of sky, you have a lot of water without any detail in it. You have a little line of ground, and then you have a person who's almost completely in darkness. Right, so it's very high contrast with the person. Everything else is very neutral. It's very, very simple. The only thing that would make this more simple is if you got rid of the ships in the background, because they can kind of distract. But they still fit the mood. It's okay. Here's an example of a picture I took that is very not minimalistic in comparison. Why? There's so much going on. There's so much going on in this picture. You got the fire. You got all the sticks in the fire. You got all the twigs outside the fire. The snow has all... It's not clean snow. There's a random stick in the middle of the lake here. There's this random log sticking out of nowhere. You have this white tree. You have all these green trees. You got this slope. You got the sky. There's so much going on. Our eyes are all over the place. It takes a long time to actually see everything in this photo. Whereas with the first picture, you see everything in this photo in a few seconds. This one takes a lot longer. I don't normally take a lot of minimalistic photos, so I had to search. I had to search for a lot of examples of stuff that were at least kind of minimalistic. So this was one that I would consider kind of minimalistic, because there's not a lot going on. It's very dark, but there's a couple things that make this not really minimalistic, right? It's just the sheer amount of trees and that there's a lot of space between the trees. But also the fact that there's a lot of bright color, right? You see in minimalistic, it's usually very black and white and grays. It doesn't have to be, of course. But yeah, there's I think the factors that the blues and the sky and the greens are too vibrant that kind of steers this away from being minimalistic. But as you can see here, if we desaturate and turn this more of a black and white, then it definitely does become a bit more minimalistic. Right? The only things that would be stopping this from minimalism, again, is maybe the tones are still a bit bright in the sky, especially over here. In the ground, the shadows are fine. I don't think I would change that. You got the lens flare, which is distracting on this side. But again, I wasn't taking this really for minimalistic purposes. Here's an example, something I didn't take, of minimalism with some color in it, right? Our subject is the only thing in this photograph, takes up most of the photograph, plain white background. Easy simplicity. Here's an example where it doesn't have to be black and white at all. Everything in the black background is blurred, or in photography we call this effect bokeh or bokeh. I don't really know how it's pronounced. Some people say both. But we got our one subject in clear focus, and that's it. That's all we see in this photograph. It's very simple. And here's one more example of a picture I took. This is in Chilliwack in the mountain ranges there. I was standing on Mount Cheam, and this is the picture I took first. I took it a landscape so I could, get a good picture of the mountains and the moon and the kind of dusk sky in the background. But this is not a minimalistic picture because there's so much going on. Just with the mountains, how rugged they are, the patches of snow, right? So what I did, I took a portrait picture. And this definitely becomes a bit more, I wouldn't call it minimalistic, but it becomes more simple. It becomes simpler than this one, right? Because there's less mountain, there's more sky, and the colors just kind of add to how simple it is. It's a very nice transition. So when we talk about simplicity in photography, it doesn't necessarily mean minimalistic like this, right? It just means take pictures a bit more simply. It all depends on the situation, right? Not every picture needs to be simple, but sometimes that can help with, at least if you're trying to show it to people, trying to print these off, it helps the viewer understand what's going on. It makes it easier to look at.